Welcome back and thank you for staying with KTN Prime. Now let's dive into that conversation of the heavy rains ongoing in different parts of the country and specifically in Nairobi County, which has been largely affected. And joining me for that particular discussion to my immediate left is Bram Simiu, who's the Chief Officer, Disaster Management and Coordination in Nairobi County. And of course, to me is Ibrahim Otieno, Chief Officer, Environment at Nairobi County. Gentlemen, thank you so much for making time. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, viewers as well.
Okay, so let's start with you, Bram. You know, when you talk about disaster management and coordination, we expect swift, response. Many Nairobians are asking, why did it take the county so long to respond?
Well, thank you, Ashley, for giving us an opportunity to just share with Nairobians what we are doing to deal with this matter of disaster, particularly the floods that we're all experiencing in the county at the moment. I think it's fair to say that this is one of the heaviest episodes of flooding that we've experienced in a long, long time. Therefore, it's unprecedented in terms of the impact that it's caused to Nairobians in general. We know that the floods have not only disrupted lives, destroyed infrastructure, but they've also disrupted a lot of people's livelihood. And, in a sense, led us to uncharted waters, so to speak. Now, from the perspective of the county government, we have the Disaster Management and Coordination Sector, which was established in 2018 to help deal with the various hazards that we experience in Nairobi and the neighboring counties. Now, when you look at the types and nature of let me say hazards that we face, we predominantly experience fires to the extent that as a county government, we've actually distinguished ourselves in terms of measuring our response parameters to responding to fires, road accidents, building collapses, and so on and so forth. When you respond to flooding, it's a different phenomena. This occurs at night and on a wide scale, as opposed to isolated incidents such as fires or road accidents that are localized. Therefore, in terms of managing it, in terms of responding to it, it's much more coordinated. So in many ways, the floods that you're experiencing in Nairobi have stretched our capacity quite a bit. And I'm sure as we go along with the show, we'll be able to illustrate that the current floods occur on a very wide spectrum. When you look at the topography of Nairobi, we have the highlands where all the major rivers emanate from. The Nairobi River, the Mathare River, and the Gong River, and the various tributaries. And this snake through different parts from the highlands, settled down around the city center, this Nairobi West area, before getting to the flatlands of Ruai, Dandora, and converging to go into the Athi River. Now, whenever we have the kind of phenomena that we have now, which really is a case of the rivers bursting their banks and therefore affecting areas that are built up. Yeah. You realize that on a night such as what we witnessed the day before yesterday, this occurred in quite a number, almost 7-8 sub-counties. So we have Kibra being hit, we have Mathare, we have Kasarani, we have Embakasis. So in terms of response, we did our best. We were able to deploy our firefighters, working with other emergency response services to respond to the cases that we could, in terms of just going to rescue those that have been affected. And I must salute our firefighters. One of these days, if you ever got the chance to really spend what I'd call a normal day at the office with many of the firefighters that we have in Nairobi County, you'd be amazed at the resilience, the sacrifices, and just going out of their way to save lives and property. The life of an emergency worker or a firefighter is interesting because whereas everybody else is running away from a hazard or from a danger or a peril, they run towards it to save lives and property. So I must say that as a county, we've done what we can with what we have. And I believe that we've done fairly well in terms of of reaching as many as we can. And again, just to say that in this space of disaster management, unfortunately, you never quite get a chance to celebrate the successes. What sticks out will always be that 1, 2, 3 unfortunate incident where we may not be able to succeed. But I must say that on average, we've tried our best. I think we must be the leading emergency response, firefighting force, not just in Kenya, but also in the region. Okay. And there are many things that we can learn from the positive experiences we've registered, particularly this current flood. So I just want to say that we'll continue doing our best as a county government to be able to respond to all disasters or emergencies as and when they are reported to us.
Okay, coming to you, Ibrahim,
yes.
You say that it's unprecedented. So yes. What can we attribute this to? Like, yes, we're used to heavy rains, but this is on a different level.
Yeah, sure. Sure, thank you, Ashley. And I want to agree with my colleague Bram that the rains that we are experiencing this particular season is more than what we have experienced in the previous seasons. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you're going by the predictions of the Met Department, we're actually expecting more rains going into the weekend. Yeah. So the rains, of course, can be attributed to several factors. But again, one of them that I think stands out, and I think something that people really need to understand, is that we're experiencing climate change globally. And this is why you see that the flooding events are occurring almost across the globe. We had floods in Dubai, we had floods in Hassal areas, in areas that normally we do not have rainfall in such magnitudes. In fact, it was mentioned today that the rains that we've had in some of the Hassal areas is rains that they would actually get over a period of 3 years, but it has occurred in a duration of less than a month. So that tells you that the amount of rainfall that we are receiving is actually very high, and particularly for a city like Nairobi.
Okay. So then now we know climate change is there with us. Yes. Ideally, we should be able to prepare and plan ahead. Why wasn't that the case? Because someone can argue, we are talking about the fact that we did not expect these heavy rains, but just last year, we had the issue of El Nino. If we were prepared back then, why is it that we're not prepared this time around?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Ashley. Again, let me say that as a county government, we've made quite some progress in the style and manner in which we are dealing with disasters. For a long time, since we established the first fire station at Tomboya Station in 1909, we've been focused on the response component of disaster management. But modern best practices require us to shift to what we call disaster risk reduction, which then helps us to address matters of mitigation, prevention, of course, then still have response capabilities enhanced, and then also the issue of recovery. So what has happened in the recent past since His Excellency Governor Sakaja took office was to relook at our entire approach to disaster management in the county. Okay. And one of the institutional changes that happened is that we created, under the disaster management sector, we created a new directorate known as the Disaster Risk Reduction, whose focus and emphasis is on mitigation and prevention. Now, what has happened, we also recruited what we call disaster management officers who have been deployed to the sub-counties and to the wards. And the intention is for them to work very closely with the community to build community resilience. So what they do is to then engage with the community, create awareness on the different perils and the hazards that we face, be it fire, be it flooding, such as the case of engaging with those that live along the riparian lands to, caution them on the dangers of actually staying on the riparian lands, putting in place early warning systems with which you're able to issue alerts whenever such rains are imminent, and encouraging them to actually evacuate. So our approach to disaster management is really focused on disaster risk reduction. And it is for that reason that you alluded to El Nino. And I must say that when you look at the impact we felt then across the, compared to other parts of the country, Nairobi really was spared the worst of it. And this was because of this deliberate approach by the county government to focus on the mitigation aspect. And it's again is that background that my colleague Ibrahim will also share with you the experience of what you call the Green Army.
Okay.
The 3,000 young men and women who were actually recruited to clean up our drainage system, to be able to clean up, collect the garbage, ensure that they unclog, the blocked, pathways, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And to that extent, we realized that when El Nino happened, our drainage system was able to handle the rains at that time.
Okay.
But I think we need to distinguish the El Nino rains of then and the current flooding that you're experiencing.
Okay.
A lot of the impact of what you're feeling is because of rivers breaking the banks. The heavy rainfall that has come, and then it causes the rivers to overflow and affect, the built-up areas that border it. It goes beyond the issue of drainage.
Okay.
This is actually a natural, let me say, a disaster, for lack of a better word, that goes beyond the usual reliance on drainage systems. And I say this conscious of what my colleague has mentioned just a minute ago,
okay,
that it's a global phenomena, that even in cities that are considered to be much more advanced than ourselves, with the best drainage systems, are also experiencing this kind of phenomena this kind of flooding, this current flooding challenges that we're experiencing in the country.
Maybe you need to distinguish the difference, because from what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong,
yes,
El Nino is ideally supposed to be worse than heavy rains, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand this.
Let me put the distinction there so that we understand. So what's happening now, we have, I would say, 3 types of floods that normally would occur in a scenario like we are in today. So there's what we call the fluvial flooding, which is what we are experiencing today. So it's the rivers that actually, it's also called river flooding. So it's the rivers that have burst their banks, as rightly explained by Bram. Then there's the flash floods. So the flash floods would occur when rains over a short period of time, maybe about 6 hours. Then we have flash floods that are moving. Then maybe after a few hours that dissipates, so it goes away. Then, of course, the zonal flooding that would happen probably in the coastal areas, so the coastal flooding, mostly in the coastal areas. So what we're experiencing now is actually that there is a lot of rain that now, when it gets into the rivers, it's beyond the carrying capacity of those river channels, and therefore the rivers burst their banks. So this is why it's causing flooding in those particular areas. And when you're dealing with issues of climate change, there are 2 things. There is adaptation, and then there is mitigation. So the mitigation aspect of it is what comes early. It's what in disaster they are trying to say the prevention part of it. But in scenarios where you are not able to mitigate, what do? Then you adapt to the situation as is. So in some of these scenarios that we are experiencing today, we do not have control over the amount of rainfall that could have come to the city. And therefore, how do we then live with the rainfall as is today for those that have already been affected? Okay. Some of the now adaptation issues that we are dealing with, of course, I think, and Bram will enumerate, is how do we help these, families that have been affected along these particular riparian areas to, live harmoniously, of course, with within those particular areas where they have been affected, but also, have these families evacuated or removed from the areas that we are advising that are very dangerous, because when we experience more rain like already been predicted, then the possibility of this still occurring is there. So therefore, they have to be able to adapt to the scenario and move to higher grounds.
Before we even get to adapting, let's talk about the difference between, and that's what I'm saying, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. In my knowledge, El Nino is ideally supposed to be worse than heavy rains.
Yes.
So what's the difference between the 3 types of floods that we've talked about and El Nino?
So El Nino is just a phenomenon in rain. Because we have rainfall, like the normal rain, we have normal rainfall seasons. But then El Nino is one of those seasons that you can have more than above average rainfall.
Yeah.
So if the El Nino that we had at that particular time was not more than above normal rainfall, then that is why, because of the work that was done by the 3,500 Green Army officers, we were able to contain the floods within, particularly in our drains. Of course, there were some few areas that were affected because of other factors beyond, of course, the drainage capacity, but we were able to contain most of the floods, and we were able to drain away. So after a few hours after the rain, you would realize that because the drains are working, even though there could be, a bit of water on the roads, but after a few hours they will dissipate, that I was mentioning.
Okay.
So they'll go away. So what we're experiencing now could be, it's a normal rainfall season, but the amounts could be more than what could have happened during an El Nino season.
Okay, so let's give credit where it's due.
Sure.
We appreciate what the Green Army is doing. But what's coming to my head right now is, so then as a county, are we looking at short-term solutions instead of long-term solutions? Because you've talked about the Green Army and the work that they did at that particular time. In my head, ideally, the best way to go about it is to have a long-lasting solution so that we don't have to come back. So are we trying to say, or are you trying to say that during that particular time, it was just a short-term, measure that was being put in place instead of long-term?
No, I wouldn't call it really short-term, but
Yeah.
of course in interventions, there are always short-term interventions, and then mid-term interventions, and there are long-term interventions, because we expect rainfall to continue to happen over a period of time.
Yeah.
So when we maintain these drainage systems, eventually, when the rains that happen are within the normal limits, then we expect that we will not have flooding. So therefore, it's not just a short-term solution, but it's a long-term solution, and something that we have to continuously do, because of course there is siltation in these drains. Even if people that are also, of course, dumping, indiscriminately sometimes in these drains, and therefore we need to continuously clean these drains, desilt them, to ensure that whenever there is rainfall, then there is a channel for which that then the floods or the water then can flow into the rivers. So it's not very short term in my view, it's actually long term. But of course there is also other long-term solution that really we are looking into, particularly with the work sector, because some of the drainage systems must, of course, be upgraded. There are areas that will require to do a lot of overhaul of our drainage systems. You know that even today, as we're speaking, already the rains have come into the city, and the city, there is what we call the infiltration. So the amount of water that can now go down, because already there is the saturation levels have been reached in the soil. So even very little amount of rainfall will create some flooding, because that water has to now, it's not infiltrating into the soil, so it's getting into the drains. So that is why we really require these people to continuously do what they're doing here.
Okay, you've talked about the fact that some drainages will have to be upgraded.
Yes.
Do we know which areas?
Yes, I think the road sector has already mapped certain areas where they would require to overhaul some of their drains. And of course, I would give an example. If you look at the way, because the roads within the city, not all of the roads are county roads.
Yeah.
But of course, no Nairobian will choose which road to follow. They will not say, we are not going to use a county road, and we are not going to use a Kura road or a Kena road. So when it floods, it actually affects everybody. It's a pedestrian, a motorist. So, for instance, you will have a Kena road that is, its outfall drain is on a Kura road, whose outfall drain is on a county road, and therefore the planning is supposed to be multi-agency, so that whenever there is, a road that is being done, whether it's Kura, Kena, or county, then the flow of that particular water is, designed in a way that it doesn't affect either of the roads along the corridor. So
are you aware of which ones in the county?
Yeah, there are drains, I think. I'll give you the exact drains that they are going to work on, but I know they already, the Max team have already identified particular drains that they need to repair. Okay. Sure.
All right. So, the fact that today, the weatherman did mention that from today, going all the way to Saturday, there's going to be an increase in rainfall, I think exceeding 40 millimeters, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, yes, sure.
He said that we need to adapt.
Yeah.
So now that we know, how are we adapting?
Yeah, I think actually, just to also chip into what my brothers mentioned, I think one of the things that we must acknowledge is that disasters will happen. Not if, but when. I mean, that's how nature is. That's how life is.
Yeah.
And what we need to do in terms of adaptation is to build what we call community resilience. And building community resilience is really working together to help the public to understand how to behave or how to coexist whenever such phenomena happen. And I want to draw parallels to countries that are naturally disaster prone. If you go to the Philippines, you go to Japan, they are hit by typhoons, they're hit by earthquakes. So as a society, they've learned both in terms of behavior through constant public awareness, also, and of course combined with infrastructure adaptation. So we look at how do we ensure that even when you're doing our construction, our building, how do we ensure that our buildings take into cognizance the need to provide for safety and security, to have emergency escapes, to ensure that the fire escapes are part and parcel of our construction, to ensure that our developments, be they stadia, be they roads, that we take into account the issue of safety and security of members of the public.
Okay.
So at that level, once we integrate disaster risk management as part and parcel of our socio-economic development, then you realize that we'll be able to mitigate the impact of such disasters as and when they happen.
Okay.
So that really is the direction that we must take. And like I mentioned, I think Nairobi is one of those counties that is on the first lane to align itself with what is known as the Sendai framework, which encourages society and more so governments to pursue disaster risk reduction. So work towards prevention. As they say, prevention is always better than cure.
Yeah.
So as a county, we have quite a number, and as I mentioned, we have the Disaster Risk Reduction Directorate that works directly to the lowest unit at the ward level. So if it's Kawangware or Mathare, what are we doing? We are working with the communities to put together community response teams as the first responders. And I must salute members of the public, particularly in places like Mathare, where we've worked very closely with the Red Cross to establish community response teams. I would dare say that the fatalities and the losses that we've experienced would have been much higher, were it not for the fact that, to a large extent, the community in most of these even riparian lands that you're talking about have been sensitized and have been given some fair level of capacity to be the first line in terms of responding.
Okay.
So that they're able to, by the time the professionals get to the scene, you realize that a lot of work will have been done to the community. So I think the short answer to the discussion of what do we need to do is just to build community resilience, which is a combination of knowledge, which is a combination of skills, which is a combination of putting systems in place, ensuring that we have the infrastructure in place to support emergency response as and when the need arises.
You've quoted Japan, yeah,
Yes.
and Philippines. For example, I'll give you an example of Japan. Some
Yes.
areas, I don't know what's the right term, but the buildings sort of have shock absorbers.
Precisely.
Here you're saying that, our houses need to have emergency exits and
Yes.
all that.
Yes.
Should that fall on the county? Because we have buildings being brought up.
Yes.
No one is looking at whether they are ideal.
Yes. Yes.
Who should be doing that? Even as we talk about prevention is better than cure,
Yes.
we should have a system in place that checks all this. So is the government then, in that particular aspect, letting Kenyans down?
Well, I think it's the responsibility of government to guarantee the safety and security of the citizens.
Yeah.
And it's true that I think the mandate in terms of the safety and integrity of the construction is really with the county government. And I must say that we're doing our best to ensure that we have buildings that comply with the best practices and acceptable standards as prescribed by the professional agencies. And it is in that respect that, for example, you realize today His Excellency the Governor Sakaja actually has issued a directive for cessation of all building approvals until the county government reviews where we are now and puts in place sufficient checks and balances to ensure that we do not have unsafe buildings being approved. And I think that's just one of the measures that I can propose that shows the government's commitment to ensure that we have the buildings that actually are safe for habitation.
Okay.
We may not go to the same extent like Japan, where they've put the shock absorbers, because again, different areas have different hazards. So for us, earthquakes are not really yet a major hazard that we are facing. So, but I think you're working towards ensuring that we ensure that the buildings are safeguarded from flooding, from fires, and other hazards or perils that the public might face.
Okay. This season has really exposed us as a country, not just in Nairobi, but various parts of the country. When you talk about the fact that we have buildings on riparian land, how then do we, because I had the governor talk about how people should move,
Yes.
For example, let me give you an example. You have bought land in riparian, in a riparian land area. You've built your house. It does not have the necessary, what's the right word, the measures put in place. What happens then? How can you change that now? It's too late. Because ideally, I would expect, I don't know, I'm not an engineer, I don't know much about construction, but I would expect maybe there's like, how we have parking lots in such, so it's raised.
Yes.
I think that would be the best ideal way to look at it. So then for someone who is listening to us right now, they're thinking, okay, I've already spent millions, what next? Considering that this is just the beginning of climate change and the effects of climate change.
Yeah, so as rightly placed by Chief Bram, I think, of course, there are building codes, there are building laws, and of course, there are areas where people are allowed to do construction. But of course, you also can't, and of course, these legislations are in place to ensure that there is safety, of course, in these buildings that people construct. But you can also not legislate people's behavior. You can't give legislation that would then tell somebody, make them change their behavior. So you would find people building in riparian reserves, knowing very well, of course, it is a riparian reserve. People have built up to, of course, the river banks, of course, knowing very well it's within a particular reserve. Of course, even in certain areas, you will still find the WA, Water Resources Authority, have already pegged, and there is a peg that is either inside somebody's house or behind their house, but of course, they are within that particular zone. So really, the advisory that His Excellency the Governor has given is to save lives. Please move away from these particular areas so that we do not have a scenario where we are, trying to, move you from the government trying to forcefully move people from these particular areas. It is the duty of government, as rightly placed, to protect property and lives. But of course, these properties and lives should be in a place that then government can be able to guarantee, their safety.
Yeah.
And of course, I would tell you that most of those houses in the riparian reserves, I think maybe 90 or 100% of them do not have any building approvals.
Okay.
These are things that people do, of course, illegally. They will wait when Bram and myself and yourself are asleep and do something. So even today, we would find that probably some people are trying to go back into, the places that were flooded because it didn't rain yesterday, and so there's thinking that it has stopped. So the advisory the Governor gave, His Excellency the Governor gave, is that please do not go back, because the prediction is still that we are going to have even more rains coming. So if you go back to the same places you are, and of course you'd understand why people want to go back, because they lack their houses, they lack shelter, and of course even where they are sheltered, it's temporary. So after what happens. So that is why you'll still find people wanting to go back to those particular areas.
Okay.
But the advisory is, please kindly stay in these particular places where you are safe, rather than putting yourself at risk.
Is there a way maybe Kenyans can know this particular area is a riparian land? Is there like a way, is there a system, is there a portal where we can go into and find out? So before you actually move or buy land, you are aware that, this is a reserve.
Yes, there is a way, and as I was mentioning, the Water Resources Authority has actually pegged, I think, all the rivers within the Nairobi River ecosystem. So there will be a peg. I don't know if you've seen, maybe you haven't been to the rivers, but you've been to the road reserves, and you've seen sometimes something that is placed by Kura to indicate, the road reserve. It's the same thing with the rivers. So they have already pegged, and of course those people see those pegs, and that's why I was telling you, you could find somebody who has built, and a peg is actually within his, living room. So they already know that they're within the reserve. So yes, there's a way of knowing.
Okay.
Sure.
Coming back to you, Bram, the county budget available on your site shows that 145 million was allocated for support of disaster management activities and infrastructure. Will it be enough in this particular season where, we are seeing things that we did not expect initially?
Well, I'm not quite sure where you got the figure.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, but let me say this, that as a disaster management sector, we exist to deal with all forms of disaster as and when they occur.
Yeah.
And the spectrum of disasters are many. So we intervene in terms of road accidents, we intervene, of course, like now, we intervene when there are fires, we have building collapses, and so on and so forth. So when you look at how His Excellency has organized this government, our mandate is to ensure the safety and security of Kenyans, of Nairobians, and Kenyans by and large. And our overriding principle, or the foundation of what we do as a sector, is actually His Excellency's promise to Nairobians to create a city of order, where there's hope and dignity. So our responsibility is to ensure that we work towards achieving that objective, and more so to persons that have been affected by disasters. And having said that, budgeting adequate resources for disaster will never happen. We'll never have enough resources to help us deal with all the disasters we meet. And it's for that reason that even the Constitution, the fourth schedule, actually considers disaster management as a concurrent function of both the national and the county government. So where we are now as Nairobi County, and Nairobi County is really the face of Kenya, and we accommodate not just the aspirations and interests of locals in terms of Kenyans, but even the international community. So when it comes to budgeting and dealing with the disasters, particularly if you're looking at this current phenomena, it then goes beyond the budget that we have prescribed as a county government. It's for that reason that you'll really realize and appreciate that no person less than the president himself has taken personal interest, and just today actually chaired a multisectoral meeting that brought together both the national and county government to consider the challenge that we have ahead of us and come up with a practical strategy of dealing with this disaster in Nairobi, but also in the other 23 or so counties that are affected. Okay. So disaster management from a budgeting perspective, I would want to say that it's all hands on deck, to use the president's own words today, that we need every resource we can lay our hands on. We need every technical support. We need equipment from the county government, from the KDF, from NYS, from private contractors, that you're able to marshal the necessary resources to help us respond to this current challenge that you're facing. Okay. So I would not want to actually look at our capacity to address this current phenomena from the county government from our normal budget that we've sort of developed.
You've talked about the practical strategy. Apart from the all hands on deck,
yes,
can you divulge any other information?
Well, I think just to also share with the public that the multi-sector approach is not anything new. As a county government, we've had this as a strategy from before El Nino, where we created internally a multisectoral team that brought together all the key agencies or key sectors. So we have disaster management taking the lead, where I basically chair the group, I chair the forum. We have my colleague Ibrahim's environment sector, we have works, we have public health, we have public communication, because again, public communication and awareness is a key component of disaster risk reduction.
Yeah.
That multisectoral team also onboards NGAO, the national government, through the regional commissioner, the district county commissioners, the ACCs. So that Apex committee, and it's actually convened by His Excellency the Governor and the regional commissioner, Mr. Kate. And its mandate really is then to look at Nairobi's disaster risk profile and come up with county strategies that can sort of address the challenges. But more importantly, these multisectoral committees that bring together the county government players as well as the national government players, we incorporate the Red Cross and other key actors, has been cascaded to the sub-counties. Okay. So we have sub-county disaster management committees that are convened by the DCCs and the sub-county admins, and also the sector leads at the sub-county level, who are also able then to deal with matters related to disasters or emergencies in their jurisdiction and come up with what I'd consider localized solutions. And this is important because of the 17 sub-counties that we have in Nairobi, they all have different risk profiles. So we know that flooding hits certain counties are more prone to it. So we have Mathare, Embakasi South, Embakasi North. We have, you know, the Mukuru areas, the Kibera, Soweto, Sarangombe. We have areas that have been mapped traditionally to be affected. The Waruku in Westlands, those are known to have flooding as a challenge. Therefore, the sector disaster management, the sub-county disaster management committees at that level are able to then ascertain the risks, establish the solution, and deal with it at that level. Where it's not, where they're not able to then address that particular challenge because of different reasons, maybe resource requirements, they then escalate it to the county, to the sub-county platform. Okay. Or the county platform.
Okay. Yeah. You know, going from what you say today, the president did mention that, you know, NYS should allocate land for those who have been affected by floods. Communication is key, as he's mentioned. So how are you reaching out to those people who are affected in, you know, for example, Mathare? We've been seeing the videos going around on social media, and you're seeing some of them on the rooftops. So if they're there, chances are there's no electricity. You know, how are they going to get this information? Is there a way, perhaps?
Yes, maybe I'll attempt to answer that, and then I'll allow my colleague Bram also to come in. And I think after the meeting that is mentioned, His Excellency the Governor and CS Moses Kuria actually went to Mathare today, and not just went to Mathare to see, of course, the situation as is, because we were there yesterday with also His Excellency the Governor, but they also went there to, you know, give relief to the families that are affected. These families have already been, with the multi-agency team that Bram has mentioned, they have already been placed, and of course their data has been picked by the ACCs and the sub-county administrators that we have on the ground. And where they are located, in fact, even in these institutions where they are hosted, it's known the numbers, and they have families that are affected, and they are able to get information from this multi-agency team. So that tells you that the multi-agency team is actually working, and they are able to get information of the people on the ground.
Okay, even as you add on to that, do you know the extent of the, you know, what's the right word, the damage? In terms of, let's say, economic damage, how many families have been displaced, and all that property?
Yeah. We, like I mentioned, it's actually a multisectoral effort at the ward level up to the sub-county level, and on a day-to-day basis, we are able to receive feedback from our disaster management officers, from the Red Cross teams on the ground, and we are able to actually ascertain how many families have been impacted. As we speak, we estimate that about 12,000 households have been affected in Nairobi. Okay. Almost, that will amount to almost 60,000 members, assuming that an average household has about 4 to 5 people. In Mathare alone, I must say that Mathare has experienced the brunt of the effect of this flooding problem. And almost 60% of those affected in that sub-county, close to 6,000 households have been affected. And as my colleague has alluded, As a sector, we've actually mapped out what we'd consider to be temporary shelters across the county. And these are largely social halls that they belong to the county government. We have churches. We shy away from using educational institutions. But just to say that we have a very clear database of possible holding grounds where we can accommodate those that are displaced and may not be accommodated by maybe friends and family, and we're able to actually have them, as is mentioned. The national government and His Excellency the President actually graciously, of course, directed the National Youth Service to also make available its facilities for this particular purpose.
Yeah.
So as a county government, we are prepared in extreme cases where we have persons that have been displaced and have nowhere to go. We have those holding grounds or holding areas where we can be able to actually accommodate them and see how best to support them. And this is really important, particularly for women and children, who actually are the majority of those that have been affected.
Okay.
Yes.
This is something that chances are it will reoccur.
Yeah.
Number one, how should Kenyans minimize the growing risks of flooding? You know, considering you've been talking about climate change, what can we do? What part can we play in minimizing this?
So we might not be able to, minimize flooding per se, because if it rains more than the capacity of the carrying capacity of either the drains or the rivers, then of course the rivers will burst their banks. But we can be able to minimize, the risks that is associated with flooding in those particular areas, and this can be done through early warning systems and communication. And I think having this multi-agency team, I think my colleague forgot to mention that we're also working with Red Cross. And as of today, they have actually sent, of course, countrywide, 11 million messages to people that are living in areas that are considered to be, flood-prone areas. And so this includes people that are living within Nairobi City, particularly along the riparian areas, based on the warnings that we get from meteorological department. People are able to be warned to move to higher grounds early. So these are the ways that we can be able to minimize the flooding incidences that we would experience in the city. The other way, of course, now, which is to do river stabilization of some of the banks to reduce the effect in case, of course, there is flooding. Yeah.
Okay. Even as we conclude, so what next from tomorrow? Chances are it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
For those who are watching, what next?
Well, I think two things. First, to just appreciate that by and large the public has been very cooperative in terms of heeding cautions and advice and warnings from administration in areas that are flood prone, particularly those that are along the river banks, the riparian system. The traditionally flood-prone areas. Most members of the public have heeded the call and are able to comply with the directions as and when they are issued. Secondly, the county government and the national government, following today's meeting and the other meetings that we've had before, are enhancing our response capabilities by pursuing a two-pillared approach. One, of course, is what we've mentioned is infrastructure focused. And I know that the county government, through the works department, has identified such a critical interventions, such as the reconstruction of bridges that have been swept away in critical areas. And I know that there's a plan to procure them under an emergency program for this to be erected within the next few days, because these are serious implications in certain areas where children actually use these bridges to cross over to go to school, persons use them to go to markets and so on and so forth. So I know that that program is on course. There are 13 bridges that have been identified by the work sector. That is on course. We also, and my colleague will confirm, there's a clear program to also enhance drainage support and garbage collection, because part of the challenges you're facing in some of the areas that are being flooded is just instances of accumulated garbage that is causing even backflows in natural waterways. So that is being worked on in terms of infrastructure support. On the humanitarian side, like I mentioned for Nairobi, we've mapped out the 12,000 or so households. We hope that the number will not go up. And these families, there's a clear plan to procure, again, food under emergency circumstances as a county government, but also the national government through the special programs ministry to procure food and non-food support, which will then be distributed to those persons that have been affected, including dry rations. And we're also grateful because the Red Cross, UNICEF and other persons of goodwill and organizations of goodwill have also stepped forward, including the St. John's ambulance, also stepping forward to ensure that the affected persons have food and non-food support. We're also looking at enhancing the public health support in terms of even distributing water treatment tablets. You know that with these floods, there's a threat of secondary hazards, particularly cholera and typhoid. So the county government and other partners, including the national government, are actually working closely to ensure that persons, particularly those in the low-income settlements, have access to clean water. We have Nairobi Water that has been distributing clean water in some of these areas. So there's quite a bit going on, and we're also stepping up public communication through the Baraza sensitization, activating our local community response teams to just ensure that our ability to adapt or to deal with these floods as and when they occur is better than in the past. Being prepared, I think, takes us a long way in terms of mitigating any challenge that will face us.
Okay, what about you?
Thank you very much. I think he's really enumerated what the county is planning, of course, with our stakeholders on supporting the victims of these flooding events. But I think he should also probably remind members of the public who are at toll-free line, so that in case we continuously experience other emergencies, they can be able to call, and so that they can be assisted. And the toll-free line, I think, is 1508.
Correct.
So members of the public can use that line to call Nairobi City County at any time. It's a 24-hour line that is manned to be able to report incidences, of course, where flooding has occurred, and probably there are people that have been affected, so that they can be assisted in good time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And earlier on you talked about the fact that we need to coexist with the environment.
Yes.
Maybe how best as Kenyans can we do that?
Of course, coexisting with the environment would mean that we do some of the best practices, what we normally call in environment sustainable, practices, particularly when we're dealing with issues of environment. But again, I would, for us of now, is just to advise, because the issue we are dealing with is flooding per se, is to advise that people really ever move away from the riparian areas where they're likely to be flooded. So that would be coexisting.
Okay, but just one more question. Yes. Kenyans can be hard-headed, for lack of a better word. Yes, right now they'll move, but once the rain subsides, they'll go back. How do we ensure that this does not reoccur?
So, of course, in the multi-agency teams that we are working with, the best thing that we are doing now is, of course, apart from evacuating them from or advising them to move, is also, of course, they have seen the danger. And of course, when you go to sleep with your neighbor and the following day, unfortunately, his house is swept away, it also, gives you a second thought on where you are living, on where you want to go back. I would not want to say that there will be a very compelling reason that would want to bring somebody back to a particular area where they already experienced, challenges with, flooding. And of course, the government is also available through, of course, the disaster management team to assist in areas where there is extreme scenarios where we require assistance from government.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We had Ibrahim Otieno, who is the Chief Officer, Environment, Nairobi County, and of course, next to me, Ibrahim Simiyu, Chief Officer, Disaster Management and Coordination at Nairobi County. Thank you so much. I'm Ashley Mazuri. I hope you've learned a thing or two and you'll be keeping safe during this period. Have a good night.